From Eve's Diary by Mark Twain. We are getting along very well now, Adam and I, and we are getting better and better acquainted. During the last day or two, I have taken all the work of naming things off his hands. And this is a great relief to him, for he has no gift in that line at all, and is evidently very grateful. He can't think of a rational name to save him, but I don't let him see that I'm aware of his defect. Whenever a new creature comes along, I name it before he has time to expose himself by an awkward silence. In this way, I have saved him many embarrassments. I have no defect like this. The minute I set an eye on an animal, I know what it is. I don't have to reflect a moment. The right name comes out instantly, just as if it were inspiration, as no doubt it is, for I am sure it wasn't in me a half a minute before. I seem to know just by the shape of the creature and the way it acts what animal it is. When the dodo came along, he thought it was a wildcat. I saw it in his eyes, but I saved him. I just spoke up in quite a natural way of pleasing surprise and said, well, I do declare, if that isn't a dodo. I explained I knew it for a dodo, and although I thought maybe he was a little piqued, I knew the creature when he didn't. It was quite evident that he admired me. That was very agreeable, and I thought of it more than once with gratification before I slept.
It's a very strange development to consider that we've come to a time in history for which we say that we go into nature. We are nature. We are elements of nature ourselves. But we have these lives that are now contained most of the time in structures of wood and metal and concrete. And so we have to make a decision to take times of communion with earth, air, fire, water. Think of our pre-industrial ancestors seeing our lives now, how fortunate they might think us with our sturdy walls, climate-controlled environments, toilets, and buildings where one can walk in and just gather food and put it in a basket and walk out and take it home. Would they envy us or pity us? Some of both, I imagine. How do you enter into fuller communion with the earth? Gardening, farming, hiking, biking, camping. What have I missed? Birding. Any others that you can think of? Sailing. Skiing. Swimming. Yeah. For myself, since 2008, I've experienced the outside world fairly constantly and consistently in companionship with a beagle, which is where I learned to meander and not try to attempt so much distance in my walking as attentiveness. I am the person on the other end of a leash. As a hound dog with 225 million scent receptors, humans have 5 million, explores and experiences the world. And it's like this. You don't call it a walk with a beagle, you call it a sniffing tour. When my first beagle, Max, died in January of 2021 during the COVID shutdown, I stopped going outside entirely for a time. It was cold. I stayed in, and I cried. And I didn't walk the streets, fields, beach, or woods as I had been doing with him for 13 years. Weeks went by, and then months. I tried, but everywhere I went reminded me too much of him, and I would take myself forlornly home again or sit in my car and stare into the parking lot. I started to feel alarmed after a while, but grief can be paralyzing that way. It is irrational. By March or April or so, I said to myself, well, listen, you've got to learn how to take yourself for a walk. I must find another kind of companionship in creation, I said, to motivate me, as I really prefer quiet walks with no particular aim or goal, but to see, smell, listen, and feel. That's what my beagles have trained me to do. And at that time, it wasn't really safe enough yet to walk with other people, not to the point where you'd be able to really relax. So I decided that I would take myself on bird walks. I chose birds as my next companion animal. I was going to learn something new in embracing this. I was going to learn how to identify the bird songs that I'd been loving all my life. I was going to get guides and books and binoculars and go outside and look up and listen. A project. I downloaded several apps onto my phone that allow you to record birdsong, and then they'll tell you what birds they think it probably is. And so I did that. And that's how I got back into the woods, the fields, the beach, the marshes, and a beautiful cemetery in Nahant, where I did a committal. I did a committal for someone one afternoon, and I noticed that the birds were making such a beautiful racket that after I did the committal, I headed back to my car and I grabbed my phone and I recorded for a happy hour of wandering and trying to identify the birds in the weeping willows and the trees. This was a healing time. I moved from being the bereft owner of a collection of unused dog leashes to a person who could take herself on a walk. The COVID vaccine became available, and people would now stop for a brief moment to dare to greet each other, and we didn't wear our masks in the woods. But a couple of months into this project, I noticed something about myself. I had no ability whatsoever to retain the names and facts about the birds I had been studying. I had no talent whatsoever for recall. I remembered the song of the black-capped chickadee, because it's 2 notes, and the red-winged blackbird, because I grew up hearing that in the pond behind my grandparents' house, and that was about it. It was all I could pull out of my brain. And then I remembered that the same thing had happened to me as a younger person when I tried to become an herbalist and went wildcrafting, and when I had tried as a kid to learn how to identify trees and plants. No recall. I could pore over field guides, keep track of what I saw in little notebooks, dry flowers and label them, and use mnemonic devices to try to remember the names of things to no avail. My brain doesn't work that way. I am no Henry David Thoreau. I am no John Benson. I can tell you the name of 3 or 4 of the perennials that grow in my front garden only because they are so extremely common. Echinacea or coneflower, columbine, rosemary, lavender, and then there's that thing over there, and then there are the yellow ones over there whose name I always forget. I mean, I've seen them for 9 years. Coming up against my failure to identify birds after long effort reminded me of the disappointment and sense of failure I had had at my other attempts to better know the natural world in a more scientific way, to know the names of things, as Eve does, the workings and details of their seasons and their songs. And I had to reflect on my frustration. Why was this so important to me? Okay, if I can't be a naturalist, what is my relationship to the environment if I cannot retain knowledge about it, if I cannot name things and understand them in their specificity, no matter how many times I read about it in a book or someone tells me? How do we best and most meaningfully commune with the earth in order to love and feel connected to it and responsible for it. I still like to study birds, bird guides, and field guides, but I no longer expect that when I spot a beautiful yellow-throated something in the tree, I will know what name to call it or to anticipate its song. I am trying to be at peace with this kind of illiteracy. As I have done since I was a small child, I commune with nature in a very primordial way, the way Adam must have done in the garden before Eve started naming everything. I now consider myself a non-linguistic naturalist. I smile at flowers. I say hello. I express appreciation for their beauty. I know tulips, got those, roses, marigolds, that's pretty much it. Everything else is, oh, Lupin, I think? Is that you? I greet trees. Hi, tree. And I notice that the leaf is this or that shape, or the bark is a certain way. I remember having studied it, but the names and the facts do not come to me, and so I just acknowledge and I move along. I think you are a birch or a sycamore. And then I remember that the tree does not have a name for itself, not one in my language. Neither does the tern, or the sand plover, or the swallow, or the wren. So what am I worried about? There will be no offense taken, no quiz failed. Thomas Berry, who calls himself a geologian, says, while we have more scientific knowledge of this universe than any people ever had, it is not the type of knowledge that leads to intimate presence within a meaningful universe. The difficulty is that with the rise of the modern sciences, we begin to think of the universe as a collection of objects rather than a communion of subjects. I agree with that, while I also know that the study and naming of elements of the non-human natural world can be a deep act of reverence, as it is for many of you. I only hope that when we explore and engage in our various forms of communion with Earth, however we do it, it will generate the gratitude and awe that continues to compel us toward support and engagement of stewardship for our planet. Blessed be.
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Janet Bendowitz, and I have recently moved to Swampscott from New York. And as a proud new member of your Green Sanctuary team, I have been invited to share a reflection with you about nature. As Charles Cook, the director of Wild Earth Adventures, has said, our deepest roots are in nature. No matter who you are, where you live, or what kind of life you lead, you remain irrevocably linked with the rest of creation. In my own life, I have always immersed myself in pastoral and wooded settings in order to be quiet with my thoughts. Unconsciously, living the UU seventh principle, which, as you know, is respect for the interdependence of all existence of which we are a part. And I'm not alone in this, for certain. In fact, in Japan, where work stress is very high, many engage in tree bathing, or as they say, shirin yoku. Even one day in a wooded setting can have positive physiological and psychological benefits, such as the reduction of blood pressure levels, improvement in autonomic and immune functions, alleviation of depression, and improved mental health. Indeed, in the UK, from whence I come, depression treatment guidelines include exposure to the outdoors and forest environments to promote resilience and mental health. And I'd just like to share a moment with you of one memorable incident when I have never felt more a part of the interdependent web of existence. I was visiting my daughter in Chicago, lucky me, and she invited me to a guided meditation in a forest walk, yes, near Chicago, in Thatcher Woods, which is part of the Forest Preserve District of Cook County. And after some introductory guided meditation and Qigong practices, the group wandered off to the woods for 20 minutes of silent communing with nature. I did so, appreciating the heightening of my senses in the silence. And I was suddenly transfixed. No more than 20 feet away from me in a clearing stood a magnificent stag. I gazed at him in silent awe, and the stag slowly turned his antlered head and returned my steady gaze. Now, this went on. For me, it was an immeasurable time. I felt so many things at once. But strange as it may sound, I felt at one with this other being as we shared the beauty of the setting, the gentle touch of the breeze, the soft calling of the birds, and the verdant smells of the forest. Never have I appreciated such deep connection with the very soul of another creature. We seemed both to be busy acknowledging the surroundings and one another. I stood, one with the stag. Eventually, with a dip of his antlered head, he seemed to bid me farewell as he slowly strode away into the deeper woods, leaving me, the richer and more vibrantly aware of our mutual interconnected web of life. And I'd like, in conclusion, to share a poem by the beloved UU poet, Mary Oliver, entitled, When I Am Among the Trees. When I am among the trees, especially the willows and the honey locust, equally the beech, the oaks, and the pines, they give off such hints of gladness. I would almost say that they save me, and daily. I am so distant from the hope of myself, in which I have goodness and discernment, and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and bow often. Around me, the trees stir in their leaves and call out, "Stay a while." The light flows from their branches, and they call again. "It's simple," they say, and you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light, and to shine.